the ancient Maya people developed one of the most advanced civilizations in Mesoamerica. They invented the concept of zero, developed a highly advanced written language, and a complex calendar system. They also had knowledge of working with and processing natural resources such as limestone, salt, and jade. The term Mesoamerica refers to the many civilizations that shared similar cultural characteristics in the geographic areas comprising the modern-day countries of Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Belize, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. Some of the shared cultural traits among Mesoamerican peoples include trade, art, a calendar, and similar architectural designs. Anthropologist Paul Kirchhoff first used the term Mesoamerica in 1943 to designate these geographical areas as having shared cultural traits prior to the invasion of the Europeans, and the term has remained. The Maya lived in 3 separate sub-areas with distinct environmental and cultural differences: the northern Maya lowlands on the Yucatan Peninsula, the southern lowlands in the Pitan district of northern Guatemala and adjacent portions of Mexico, Belize and western Honduras, and the southern Maya highlands in the mountainous region of southern Guatemala. The early Maya established communities in the Pacific coastal regions around 1800 BCE. By 250 CE, the Maya had developed a vibrant civilization consisting of numerous independent city-states, including the well-known ceremonial centers of Palenque, Tikal, Copan, and Calakmul. Many of these ancient sites are surrounded by contemporary Maya towns and villages that have been actively populated for several hundred and sometimes thousands of years. The history of the Maya civilization is divided into 3 principal periods: the pre-classic, classic, and post-classic periods. During the pre-classic period, farming became firmly established in the southern, central, and northern areas. It was this period that saw the first intensive settlement of the Maya land. The earliest Maya were agricultural, growing crops such as corn, beans, squash, and cassava. The early pre-classic period marks the beginnings of agriculture. The earliest evidence for burning and cultivation of maize dates to well before 2000 BC in the Pitan area of Guatemala. The lake core sediments record the beginnings of human manipulation of the environment. These sediments show systematic, probably annual burnings, and the increasing grasses show indications of human intrusions. The Maya people were already practicing agricultural techniques of varying crop rotations, a slash and burn system, and leaving land fallow so the forest would regenerate the land. As the Maya population grew, they would have had to use more intensive farming techniques such as raised beds and terraced farming. These early agriculturists from northern Belize began to grow domesticated maize, fruits, cacao, and a selection of root crops, yet only part of their diet was supplemented by these crops. There was still the dependence on hunter-gatherer skills of the lands and waters. Hunting, fishing, and plant foraging provided an important part of the diet for the first Maya. Since social organization was simple, based on subsistence, a family-centered life prevailed in these times. The Middle Preclassic dates to the interval between 1000 BC and 300 BC. Settlements of the Middle Classic period were numerous enough to be recognized archaeologically across most of the Maya area. This was the time frame that the Maya spread from the coast up the river valleys and began moving into the interior areas. Housing sites were widespread, communities were still small, and there was little in the way of public architecture. With the larger populations and settlements in the Middle Preclassic comes the definitive evidence of public architecture. Again, northern Belize is featured at this time, and sites such as Coelho, Cerros, Nomul, and Lamanai show major building activity. The lowland Maya population continued to expand, resulting in greater competition for land. This led to increased settlement density, larger communities, and the development of better management strategies. Maya civilization began to evolve more complex and elaborate mechanisms for coordinating, organizing, and feeding the growing populations. This is revealed in their settlement distribution, architectural elaboration, and agricultural methods. It is important to remember that the Maya were not a single group of people. Rather, they were different tribes, clans, and families of people, speaking a variety of Mayan languages, who all shared strong cultural ties and traditions. The strength of the Maya culture and civilization is evidenced by the great span of time it dominated Mesoamerica over 3,000 years. Among the important changes documented in this period was the establishment of the rulership in the form of dynastic monarchies. Each Maya state had their own monarch whose successor was usually the eldest son. Ruling was seen as a male role, but there are records of women moving into positions of power. There were at least 5 noble women during the Classic period who became ruling queens of their city-states. Under the monarch was a council of advisors. The monarch appointed the numerous officials who were necessary for the smooth running of the city-state. The officials held positions such as military leaders, overseers, administrators, town councillors, constables, tax collectors, and high priests. The monarch also appointed a supreme military leader who decided strategy and called troops for battle. The monarch appointed a high priest to lead the hierarchy of priests and determine dates of ceremonies and festivals. The first recorded monarch of a Maya state was Yash Kukmo, and was the founder and first king of the dynasty that ruled the Maya city of Copan for 350 years. Known formally by his royal name Kinchyak Kukmo, he reigned for 11 years from 426 to 437 CE. One of the most famous Mayan rulers was Kinch Kanab Pakal, who today we know as Pakal the Great. He was the king of Palenque for 68 years, longer than any other ruler in the ancient Maya world. The late pre-classic period was one of major activity. At a time when occupation in the interior around Tikal was practically at its inception, the Maya were already engaging in early monument building projects. Major portions of Tikal and other interior centres were the sites of considerable public constructions, using the newly coalesced communities to build a fresh power base. At the same time the interior centres were being founded, the centres of northern Belize, particularly Nomal, Lamanai and Seros, were at their peaks, commanding the loyalty of large domains of well-established settlements. El Pilar, only 50 kilometres from Tikal, was firmly established by this time. Major public constructions of platforms and pyramids were found throughout the different sectors of the site. The Classic period saw the construction of spectacular stone cities and monuments, many of which still stand today. By the end of this period, the larger cities had been largely abandoned. The Classic period is considered the golden age of the Maya city-states. Most of the artistic and cultural achievements of the Maya civilization took place during this period. Among these achievements were distinctive writing and calendar systems, multicolored ceramics, cobalt vault architecture, major public architecture with pyramids, palaces, and ball courts. The Maya hierarchy also placed importance on scholars who maintained astronomical records, established sophisticated mathematics, and passed down detailed written texts. The Classic period is defined by the appearance and use of dated monuments. Although some monuments appear earlier than AD 250, they are unusual. The widespread use of dated stelae occurred towards the end of the 3rd century AD. A stele is an upright flat slab of stone worked in relief on 1, 2 or 4 faces. Their placement at the base of immense pyramids or in open plazas facing small stage-like platforms suggests that they were intended to be viewed by vast audiences in conjunction with other public spectacles. Stelae and altars recorded the political, social and religious history of the Maya using the long count, a calendrical system based on multiples of a 360-day year with an origin point of 3114 BC. The 7 centuries of the Classic period exhibited tremendous developments in Maya civilization that was certainly fueled by the steady increase in population. The cores of the massive monuments that we see today, consisting of monumental stone, vaulted buildings and huge temple pyramids, were founded in this period. The Classic period is often divided into 2 parts, the early and late. separated by the Hiatus. The Hiatus is a time where there was a marked decrease in building and the erection of dated monuments, particularly at Tikal. Recent studies have pointed to an instability in the interior of the central Maya lowlands, probably brought on by Tikal's involvement in a series of destructive, offensive and defensive military exploits. These so-called wars were based on the shifting alliances among the reigning regional power centers of the era, such as Calakmul and Tikal. This period of time is recorded at these important centers, but ultimately, the problems reflected by the Hiatus were surmounted, making way for an acceleration of the civilization's progress in the Late Classic. All major centers of the region experienced major growth in the Late Classic period, especially El Pilar. This growth was rooted in the sustainable management of the region's valuable resources found on the ridgelands. For more than 3 millennia, the Maya were able to support and maintain the society's growth by forging an unusual alliance with their environment. The Maya had a deep understanding of the natural resources around them and had developed some sophisticated land and crop management techniques. This alliance with their environment to this point in time was a balancing act that supported the development of the Maya civilization over some 400,000 square kilometers, or 15,440 square miles of space, and across some 15 centuries of time. The evolution of the relationship between agricultural intensification demanded by the culture and consequent environmental change was not based on long-range scientific data, as we might be able to do today, and was destined to have dire consequences. Towards the end of the Classic, the elaborate civilization of the Maya began to come apart at the seams. Notably, there was an increase in conflict, probably because of the competition over scarce resources, culminating in a drastic reduction in population. This is most dramatically reflected in the complete arrest of maintenance, not to mention construction at lowland monumental centres such as El Pilar. Residential settlements were not so abruptly abandoned, but they were too eventually abandoned. The great classic centres in the central lowlands collapsed first. Tikal was deserted in the 9th century. Building activity was prolonged at many eastern centres right to the end of the terminal classic period. Around El Pilar, occupation even extended into the post-classic. During their rise, the Maya developed one of the most sophisticated mathematical systems in the Americas. This system is the first recorded use of the concept of zero anywhere in the world. The Maya system required only 3 symbols: a shell representing 0, a dot representing 1, a bar representing 5. The system was based on 20 rather than 10. This means that instead of 1, 10, 100, 1000, 10,000 and 100,000, the Maya used 1, 20, 400, 8,000 and 160,000. Maya numbers, including calendar dates, were written from bottom to top in vertical columns. The first lowest value has a value of 1, the next above it is worth 20, then 400, then 8,000, and so on. The concept of 20 probably came from the full set of human digits, with the Maya term for person being indistinguishable from that for a unit of 20. Placing numbers in this layered way allowed the Maya to represent large numbers using only 3 symbols. Here we can see how large numbers would have been written. This image shows the number 562,677. It is important to remember that this number system was in use while the Europeans were still struggling with Roman numerals. The Roman system had a number of disadvantages. There was no zero in this system, and the numbers were entirely symbolic without direct correlation to the number of items represented. The simplicity of the Maya system would have meant that even uneducated people could still use the system. The writing system of the Maya was a sophisticated combination of pictographs directly representing objects, or glyphs expressing more abstract actions or ideas, and even syllabic sounds. Signs and symbols were arranged in blocks which were placed in double columns. The text is read from the top left and reading horizontally across 2 blocks and then moving down to the row below. In very short texts, the glyph blocks are placed in a single line and are read top to bottom in vertical texts or left to right in horizontal texts. The Mayan system of writing would go on to influence the other great Mesoamerican civilization, the Aztecs, who would build on the progress made by the Maya by incorporating even more phonetic elements into their writing. The Maya writing system continued to be used up to the Spanish conquest, but was banned as pagan text, which led to a lot of Maya texts and records being destroyed. When the Spanish arrived, there were 18 separate Maya states with many smaller towns and villages under control of the capital. Things had begun to go wrong for the Maya, and the number of problems, challenges and threats were already starting to negatively affect the civilization. In part 2, we will look at the fall of the Maya civilization and how the Maya people and culture has endured the pain of progress.